I've never been good at office parties. They always feel like a performance, like everyone's auditioning for a role they've already cast themselves in. You walk in, and the air smells like wine and ambition, cologne and competition. Everyone laughs too loud, stands a little too straight, compliments a little too sharply. But I went for her. Because she asked. Because the last time I said no to something like this, she said I wasn't trying hard enough to be part of her world. So I put on the gray suit she liked, polished my shoes, and arrived 15 minutes late to look like I wasn't trying too hard. It was at a rooftop bar downtown, all glass and steel, the kind of place where people talked about IPOs and dog breeds like they were the same thing. She was already there, wrapped in a navy blue dress, standing beside a man with slicked back hair and a watch that probably cost more than my car. She didn't see me walk in. Or maybe she did and chose not to show it. I made my way through the crowd, nodding at people I'd never met and wouldn't remember. When I reached her side, she smiled, kissed my cheek lightly, and said, "You came." That should have warmed me. Instead, it felt like a check mark on a list she didn't expect me to fulfill. Then came the man, the coworker. Dean, I think his name was. He extended his hand, firm grip, the kind that's meant to prove something. "So you're the mysterious husband," he said, his tone dipped in irony. "I was beginning to think you didn't exist." I smiled polite. "Just low profile." He smirked. "Ah, one of those. The strong, silent type." I could feel him sizing me up. His eyes dipped to my watch, my shoes. Cataloging. Comparing. I'd seen the type before, loud beneath the surface, but practiced in the art of passive digs. My wife laughed, too loudly. "Dean's just being playful. He's our star negotiator." That told me enough. Dinner was a series of jabs hidden behind laughter. Dean sat across from me. Our table was full. Her team, mostly young, polished professionals who all seemed to adore her. They laughed when he joked about people who peak in high school, just after I mentioned coaching football during my teaching years. They chuckled when he asked if I'd ever done anything outside the domestic arts. I smiled, sipped my drink, and said nothing. What they didn't know, what he didn't know, what even my wife had forgotten, was that I had once been something very different. Before teaching, before this life, before I let go of who I used to be to support her dream. She used to love telling the story of how we met, how I walked into the cafe where she worked part-time, wearing a hoodie and reading a paperback on artificial intelligence. How she'd teased me about being a mystery nerd, and I'd countered by quoting Camus. She said I intrigued her because I was different from the corporate types she always met. She used to call me her rooted one. But roots get overlooked, especially when they're buried. Dean kept going. His next move was a toast. "To partners," he said, raising his glass. "The ones who keep the lights on, support the dream, and maybe don't understand the business, but try their best." There were polite laughs. Some real, some nervous. My wife's eyes darted toward me, gauging my reaction. I raised my glass too. "To partners," I echoed. "The ones who know when to listen and when not to." He squinted, smile faltering. A beat passed. The table moved on. Later, when dessert arrived, some pistachio torte that looked like a science experiment, he leaned in across the table. "So what do you actually do?" Dean asked, as if the word "actually" would peel back some mask he was certain I wore. I looked at him calm. "These days, I teach." "But before that." I hesitated, just long enough to let the silence stretch. "I built things," I said. He laughed. "That's vague. What kind of things?" And just as I opened my mouth to answer, my wife interjected. "He used to run a little tech consultancy," she said quickly, brushing it off with a wave. "Small stuff. Local clients." I turned to her. Our eyes met for half a second. That was the moment. Not the jabs. Not the digs. That was the moment the room shifted for me. She was embarrassed. Not protective. Not proud. Embarrassed. She hadn't told them who I was. Not really. She'd rewritten me to fit the narrative that suited her rise. And I'd let her. Quietly. For years. Dean leaned back in his chair, smug. "You should come work for us," he said. "We always need someone who can do the, what did you call it? Small stuff." I smiled then. Not the tight, polite smile I'd worn all evening. A real one. Calm. Steady. The kind you wear just before the tide turns. Because the truth was, before I became the supportive husband, I'd built and sold a company to a Fortune 100. I'd written code that banks still use. I held patents, ghost consulted for 3 VC firms, and quietly co-founded 2 startups that were now household names. But I'd walked away from it all. For her. To be there. To build a life where I wasn't chasing the next acquisition, the next burnout. She said she wanted something grounded. Real. I didn't mind being small, if small meant peace. But this was something else. I looked at Dean, then glanced around the table. The grins. The glasses. The arrogance. He had no idea who I really was. Not yet. The ride home was silent. She sat beside me in the car, scrolling through her phone, the glow of the screen lighting her face. I drove, watching the city lights smear past the windshield like oil on water. There was a time when these drives home were filled with laughter, her hand resting lightly on my knee, her head leaned against the glass, telling me everything that happened that night like I hadn't just watched it unfold. But now, silence. Eventually, she spoke. "They liked you," she said, not looking up. I didn't answer. She glanced at me. Dean was just being himself. He teases everyone. Don't take it personally. I kept my eyes on the road. I didn't. You seemed tense. I let out a small breath. It's fine. It wasn't. But I wasn't ready to tell her that. Not yet. That night, after she went to bed, I sat in the living room, lights off, the hum of the fridge the only sound in the apartment. I poured a whiskey, neat, and stared at the city through the glass. I thought about all the pieces I'd given up. The consulting firm I sold before 30. The partnerships I walked away from. The university offers. The keynote invitations. All traded for a quiet life. A shared dream. Her dream. I didn't regret that. I really didn't. I believed in her. Still did, in some distant way. But somewhere along the line, she'd stopped believing in me. Or worse, started thinking of me as less. Like I'd shrunk into some domestic accessory. The husband who teaches. The man behind the woman. The thing is, I never needed the spotlight. But I did need the respect. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I unlocked the old vault. An encrypted drive, tucked away in a fireproof box behind our bookshelves. It contained everything from the before version of me. Source code. Proprietary frameworks. White papers I'd written under pseudonyms. Emails from CEOs. Old contracts. A map of a life she no longer talked about. I spent the day going through it, sipping coffee, making notes. By sundown, I'd filled a legal pad with sketches and calculations. Not plans yet, just the shape of something. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about remembering. I didn't tell her. Not because I wanted to be secretive, but because I wanted to see what she would do next. Whether she'd ask how I felt after the party. Whether she'd apologize for letting Dean speak to me like that. Whether she'd recognize the quiet shift in my eyes. She didn't. She was too busy preparing for a corporate retreat. 3 days in Palm Springs with her team. Dean would be there. On the second night of her trip, I got a text from her. A photo of her and the team by the pool. She was smiling, sunglasses on, holding a mimosa. Dean's arm was slung casually behind her on the lounge chair. Not touching, but close enough. I stared at that photo for a long time. Not because of jealousy, but because of what it represented. She knew how it looked, and she sent it anyway. That night, I reopened my LinkedIn, updated my profile, sent out 2 emails to old colleagues, ones who owed me favors. The next morning, I had 3 responses, all of them offering meetings. It was like flipping a switch. The old network lit up instantly. By the time she returned from her trip, I had coffee lined up with a venture capital group and a lunch meeting with a founder looking for a CTO. I didn't hide it. I left the calendar open on my desk. She saw it while grabbing her charger. "You're meeting with VC firms?" she asked, surprised. "Yeah," I said casually. "Just catching up with some people." She blinked. "I thought you weren't interested in that world anymore." I wasn't. Things change. There was a pause. Something flickered in her eyes. Curiosity? Confusion? Maybe even unease. But she didn't push. And that told me everything. The next week, I went to a mixer hosted by one of the VC firms. Same kind of rooftop venue. Same sleek drinks and designer clothes. Only this time, I wasn't the quiet husband at the edge of the room. I was me again. I shook hands, shared old war stories from the startup trenches. I spoke with clarity, with insight. I watched their eyes light up when I mentioned the framework I'd built, the one still in use by a major payments processor. I got invited to speak at a panel, offered equity in a stealth mode fintech app just for a few weeks of advisory work. The gears turned fast. Because when you've done it once, when you really know what you're doing, it doesn't take long to remind the world. Or yourself. The funny thing? She never asked how the event went. Never asked what I was building. She just smiled when I mentioned I'd be working late. And Dean? Well, he'd be seeing me again soon. Not as her husband. Not as the quiet plus one. But across a different kind of table. One where the terms wouldn't be so flattering. One where I wouldn't be the one underestimated. The first time Dean saw me again, he was in a navy blue blazer, leaning across a boardroom table at a downtown office building with panoramic views. He was animated, talking through quarterly projections and brand synergy, tossing around buzzwords like they were confetti. He didn't see me at first. Not right away. I was seated beside a man named David Lin, a senior partner at one of the VC firms that had taken an interest in my advisory work. David and I had clicked fast. He appreciated people who didn't talk just to hear themselves speak. He valued results, and I had a track record. Quiet, but real. Dean paced to the front of the room to cue up his slides, and that's when his eyes met mine. There was a pause, barely half a second, but in that blink of recognition, something shifted. He faltered, just slightly, cleared his throat. Looks like we've got a full room today, he said, forcing a smile. I didn't smile back. The meeting began. It was a pitch session. Dean's firm was trying to secure funding for a new AI-driven market research tool. The numbers were slick, the branding tighter than it needed to be. He talked fast, confident, gesturing to charts and predictive models like they were gospel. When he wrapped, the room went quiet. Then David turned to me. Thoughts? I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled, watching Dean squirm just a little. The UI is decent, I said slowly. But the underlying model is outdated. They're still running on a modified GPT-J base, and it's trained on skewed consumer data. Their predictive accuracy looks impressive, but it drops off the cliff beyond a 2-month window. Also, they don't have clean permissions for a chunk of their training data. Dean stiffened. We've got legal clearance. From the same team that cleared your last rollout. I asked, I steady. Because that product was quietly pulled 6 weeks after launch. The room tensed. David raised an eyebrow. That true? Dean stammered. It was a strategic withdrawal. I didn't press. I didn't need to. My point had been made. After the meeting, while the rest filtered out for catered espresso and handshakes, Dean followed me into the hallway. He kept his voice low. What are you doing here? I was invited, I said simply. He narrowed his eyes. This some kind of power move? No, but you made it personal first. He scoffed. I was joking. You weren't, I said, stepping closer. You looked me in the eye and decided I was small. Forgettable. You humiliated me, Dean. In front of my wife. In front of your team. You don't get to shrug that off now. He opened his mouth. Closed it. His jaw clenched. Does she know you're here? She doesn't even know who I am anymore. And that was the truth of it. Somewhere between the dinner parties and the dress rehearsals of corporate ambition, she'd stopped seeing me. Not the version she curated for her coworkers. The real me. The man she once called her calm in the storm. I walked away before he could respond. That night, I got home late. She was on the couch, watching some glossy reality show, a glass of wine in hand. She looked up as I set my bag down. Long day, she asked. I nodded. Productive. She smiled. You look different lately. Confident. I remembered who I am, I said, and kissed her forehead before disappearing into the kitchen. The shift continued. Over the next month, my name began to surface again. On panels, in press releases, behind funding rounds, quiet credits, whispered recognition. Not loud, not flashy, but unmistakable for those who paid attention. One night, she brought it up. Dean said you crushed him in a meeting, she said, sitting across from me at dinner. He's been weird about it ever since. I sipped my water. He probably just didn't expect to see me. She tilted her head. Why didn't you tell me? I met her gaze. Would you have believed me if I had? Silence. That silence said everything. She looked down at her plate. I never meant to make you feel less than. You didn't have to mean it, I replied. You just had to laugh when they did. Her voice cracked a little. I didn't realize. I know. She reached for my hand, but I gently pulled mine away. Not out of anger. Just clarity. Where do we go from here? She asked. And I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Some things break quietly. Others don't break until much later, when the pieces no longer fit where they used to. I wasn't angry. Not even sad. Just awake. Dean? He's still with the company. But the project never got funded. The data violations I flagged were real, And when the legal team reviewed the risks, they pulled the plug. I didn't make that call. I just exposed the truth. And as for her, we still live under the same roof. For now, we eat dinner, share space, but there's a new quiet between us. Not the silence of resentment, the silence of distance. Because the man they tried to belittle, the one they underestimated, joked about, dismissed, he never left. He just waited until the moment they saw him again. Not at a party, not at a dinner table, but when it mattered, where it hurt, where it counted.